Welcome. This is Najma Minhas and Moeed Pirzada with GVS Dialogue. Moeed, G20 Summit is happening right now as we speak in New Delhi, India. It's been seen as a spectacular event held so far. Over 200 meetings were held throughout the year. More than that has been held by any other G20 meeting. How do you see what's happening right now on the ground?
Najma, first of all, it's such a big and humongous event and a development from India's point of view. From this region's point of view, this is probably not only the first such meeting in India, but also the first such meeting in South Asia. It is very difficult to sum it up or make a comprehensive comment in a video discussion between us on the significance of this event. But I would start by saying that the leadership, the Indian government, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his team, and the India's Ministry of External Affairs under S. Subramaniam, the very able foreign minister, have made the maximum possible utility of India's G20 presidency this year. I mean, you cite the number of the meetings that have taken place, the way they have organized this $300 million convention center right opposite the Indian Parliament, and the way they have attempted creating a consensus between the East and the West, between United States and its Western allies, and between Russia and China on the other hand. The way have they tried merging the leadership of the BRICS and the G20 together on the summit is amazing. It's an amazing achievement on their part. It's a really game-changing event, and it's not only about. I mean, I think when you look at the headlines of the Western media publications like the New York Times, the CNN, the Reuters, the Bloomberg, and so many other publications and websites, they're only focusing on the fact that a very strong statement for Russia has not emerged, or Ukraine has rejected or criticized the statement. But you have to look at the G20 summit from India's lens and point of view as number of issues. The issues related to reform of the global financial institutions like the World Bank, the issues related to global trade, the grain and the fertilizer embargo which Russia has placed from Ukraine. You have to see it in terms of the engagement. I mean, look at how many different powerful countries and economies India has dealt with and negotiated. This is really a moment of leadership from India that reminds me of the 1955 Non-Aligned Movement Summit in Bandung, probably in Indonesia at that time, when Pandit Nehru, the India's then Prime Minister, rose to global prominence. I think this is a similar moment. Of course, I would not agree that I think that Narendra Modi, in my humble opinion, is nowhere close in terms of leadership to the capacities and capabilities of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. But still, I mean, it's a very big event.
It's interesting. You mentioned the mileage that the BJP is taking out of the G20 meetings. It's one of the criticisms that his opposition, in fact, is laying on him, that no other international event in this way, that when India has hosted it, has been about the individual himself. So, for example, I know we in Pakistan are used to our leaders' faces being over every single poster whenever a new leader comes into town. I'm not sure, maybe it doesn't happen in India, but this is one big criticism that is being made. Certainly in the West, it doesn't happen. You don't see Biden's face on a poster coming from Dulles Airport, from Washington, D.C. to the White House, or from DCA Airport. But in South Asia, I think it's more common. But Narendra Modi has very much been criticized by his opposition that he has really made the whole event about himself and has almost made it about electioneering in India.
I agree. I think the opposition is very much right. There is, in fact, a 26 political parties alliance under the name and the title, very impressive name, India. And just before the G20, some of the invitations that were issued from the Narendra Modi government, the presidency and all that, basically brought in India as Bharat, as a name change attempt at the time, which is also to basically invoke the feelings of nativization of India. You know, just look at the fact that India's principal opposition party, which has been ruling party for a greater part of India's history, has the name of Indian National Congress, right? And India's global identity is related to the term India, which is, of course, a British colonial construct. And to that extent, the feeling of the supporters of the BJP are true. But when BJP was created as an alliance of political parties in 1980 or 81, it deliberately named itself as Bharatiya Janata Party. So there are germs of a different kind of thinking that have also been brought forward. So, aligning the word Bharat with the Bharatiya Janata Party, right. Taking all the limelight for the Narendra Modi, it is definitely there. And I think it's a just criticism. But this is one of the aspects of this huge multi-dimensional event. I mean, just look at the leadership that is present over there. I mean, apart from Mexico, where the economic minister is there, and China that has sent its premier, Li Qiang, and Russia that has sent the foreign minister, most of the other member countries, I mean, are represented by the head of the states, prime ministers, or the president. I mean, that is true for Canada. The Canadian prime minister is here. The American, the United States president is here. The British Prime Minister Suni Rashek is here. The French Emmanuel Macron is here. The French President, Italian Prime Minister is here. The South African President is here. Turkish President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan is here. Brazil's President Lula is here. If I'm forgetting, I mean, so Brazil's president.
Yes, most importantly for Pakistan.
I'm sorry, I'm forgetting this. I mean, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is there, and also I think MBZ Mohammed bin Zayed from UAE is invited, though UAE is not a member of the G20. So it's actually a huge platform. And also, let me add a very critical statement over here. I mean, we look at this global show and branding of India and the vision they are demonstrating over there. Look what's happening in Pakistan. I mean, on the day, the major headline is this: the Shahid Arshad Sharif's wife has been issued non-bailable arrest warrants. I mean, just imagine the mediocrity of the Pakistani civil military administration. Just look at the smallness and pettiness of things that are happening. The judge that was hearing the case, that was supposed to hear the bail case of Imran Khan, the former prime minister, disappears. I mean, he's continuously disappearing for the past 7, 8, or 9 days over here. And everything that emanated from Pakistan in the last 24, 48 hours or 72 hours, points toward the pettiness of thinking, the smallness of the vision or the absence of the vision, and everything that has emerged from India smacks of a sort of a global agenda setting, a leadership setting over here.
Okay, I just want to pick up on that a little bit, because you mentioned the pettiness, but this is looking at it from a very, a day or 2 day, 3 day perspective. Really, what is this reflecting about Pakistan's economic and foreign policies?
I mean, first of all, we have to admit, to be realistic, that India was always big. India was always more important. I mean, India, even when it had not embarked on the reforms of the Manmohan Singh and Narasimha Rao government. Narasimha Rao was the Prime Minister of the Indian National Congress, and Manmohan Singh, his able finance minister in the early 90s, probably 91 or 92, embarked on the liberalization of the Indian economy. And before this, India had a very socialist model. So many people, because of this, confused. They think that India has somehow or the other emerged on the global economic scene because of the liberalization, when it wholly and fully adopted and converted itself to the Western style capitalistic market. But that's not true. That's actually not giving credit to the India's leadership from 1947-48 that had a totally different view. They were concerned about the income inequality, about the poverty, about the social paradigm. And they also, developed. I mean, look at the Indian technical institutes, which Nehru created in 1960s. So they created an indigenous manufacturing capability, technical capability, technological base, industrial base, and the reforms of the Narasimha Rao and the Manmohan Singh could only take off because of the industrial platform and the pedestal. The capability of manufacturing. I mean, for instance, look at today, India and China are the two major economies or countries with almost 80% share of the raw pharmaceutical material, right? And this happened because India has been developing its chemical industry right from the 1950s, right? And that is why today their chemical industry is the backbone for their pharmaceutical raw material. And they're not only producing the raw material, but they also are the major. I mean, look at during the pandemic, the United States government had to request India to give them the pharmaceutical raw material. So I think there has been a certain kind of sustained vision towards the future in India, which was being totally lacking in case of Pakistan. And this also happened because Pakistan from 1958 onwards became a garrison state. And we are only now waking up to the implications and impacts of that garrison state. So the garrison state mentality, starting from the garrison, not only penetrated into to the top of the offices, but all institutions of the country, universities, think tanks, technical institutes, the Senate, the foreign relation, the foreign office itself became a hostage of it. Then Pakistan's governing district administrations, courts, everything became sort of an extension of the garrison mentality. And when garrison thinking is actually a very linear thinking, whereas it's very good in terms of providing basic administrative solutions, because the military is trained to provide a logistic backbone to transportation, communication, and a basic administration, basic accounting and all that, which actually creates a false perception in the minds of the military officers and those who interact with them that perhaps military is also very good in a broader management sense. Military cannot be, because if the broader management sense...
More importantly, it has the understanding, right? That's the actual issue. You need to display an understanding. You need to have an understanding of the issues. But I just want to, going back to the G20, as you mentioned, the who's who of the world is sitting right now in New Delhi. One or two conspicuous absences. One is, of course, President Putin, who also has an arrest warrant issued against him by the International Court of Justice. So for him to travel, it would not be easy. But secondly, very importantly, is the absence of President Xi from China. What do you think? What is the reason behind that?
So first of all, let me address the issue of the arrest warrant of President Putin. If President Putin is taking a direct flight from Moscow into New Delhi, who can dare implement an arrest warrant against President Putin in New Delhi?
But you don't really want to put your host country in that situation either, do you?
No.
Delhi should arrest him.
No. Who can even dare suggest this thing that Putin should be arrested on the sovereign territory of Indian Republic? So I don't think this is the point. I don't think that Putin has not traveled. I don't know where it's coming from. Maybe some Western publication has put this idea. No one in the world can even demand of executing arrest warrant for Russia's president in India, which is a long-standing ally, which has very cautiously, despite the fact that India had a multi-dimensional strategic relationship developed with the United States, it has very cautiously tread the path between Russia and West and its allies ever since the Ukraine war. At times they have condemned the Russian position, but they haven't really gone far enough to annoy Russia. They have also maintained their supply of oil and other whatever they could obtain from Russia on concessional rates. So they have played very well, and that diplomacy and that careful, cautious path is once again demonstrated in the G20 summit, where they have given something to the West in terms of citing United Nations, in terms of citing the territorial conquest of a country where Russia is clearly, since 2014, in occupation of large territories, not only from 2022 February, but from 2014, when Russia took control of the Donbass region on the east of Ukraine. It is in possession of the Ukrainian territory. Now it is still in possession of it is still sitting next to the Ukrainian capital in Kyiv. So when India condemns the territorial acquisition and conquest of the countries and human rights, it condemns Russia, gives something to United States and allies. But at the same time, by convincing everyone not to name Russia as an aggressor in the final declaration, it gives everything to the Russia. And I'm not sure if it has been, I think it has been adopted, because Narendra Modi said that he finally made the declaration, 9 September, said that the declaration has been unanimously adopted. He made a speech to that effect. Yeah. Initially, the Russian foreign minister,
because they were not expecting any particular agreement on this language.
Let me add, because the Russian foreign minister Sergei Lavrov had pointedly said that if the declaration condemns Russia or is unacceptable to Russia, then he would block it. So a provision exists in G20 that a member can block the final thing. And I think there was a strong declaration in Bali, but there was some kind of problem towards the end last year in the G20. So they have managed to give everything. They have managed to give things to Russia. And they managed to give things. The resolution, while there has been a critical statement by the foreign ministry spokesperson of Ukraine on a Facebook, a post, but at the same time, the main, the animal and the main elephant in the room, the American president, Joe Biden, has welcomed and appreciated the final declaration. The Germans have welcomed it. The French have welcomed it. The British have welcomed it. And everyone has welcomed it apart from the Ukraine. So it's a huge success.
And the language they used, the language which actually they welcomed was the fact that they mentioned that states not use force to grab others' territories, and that was sufficient apparently. But I don't.
Also, the use of the nuclear weapons or the threat of the use of the nuclear weapons is unacceptable. That's a clear reference to Russia, because in the last several months, the Russian leaders, including the Russian president, they have all been making threats of use of the nuclear weapons. So this is clearly a pointed reference towards Russia. But, they've also demanded Russia to lift the embargo on the export of grain and fertilizers from Ukraine. However, I'm not sure will it also be, accommodating the Russian concern, because Russians said that they face export restrictions and they're not being able to export their own grain and fertilizer and other resources. So how will that be addressed?
Okay, but coming back to Xi, why do you think President Xi did not attend this particular session?
I think it's
Indians are taking it as a deliberate snub against India, given the fact that the two nations are still sparring in the Galwan Valley.
I don't think there's a snub to the India at all, because, in the last several months, I think they had a very good meeting in Bali. And generally, the Indian foreign ministers and the foreign ministries and the Chinese foreign ministries are very much engaged.
South Africa and BRICS. They last met. They just recently met in August, the end of August, in South Africa.
And which was actually a very cordial sort of meeting, and there was nothing acrimonious about it. I think the Chinese are not snubbing the Indians. The Chinese also don't react. I think the Chinese they always are thinking ahead. They're always thinking ahead. They are, after all, credit themselves, or maybe they have marketed this concept in our minds that they are a very deep civilization. I think they're thinking Chinese are trying to develop the BRICS as an alternate platform, where Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are there for the Brazil. Chinese also have created an infrastructural bank, vis-a-vis the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. So Chinese are trying to project an alternate global trading system, power system. And I think they have stayed away from the summit, principally to send this message that they have alternate ideas. Also, why the Putin has not attended it? Is it because he was shy of meeting this leadership? Maybe he was afraid that if he's on this platform, then his presence would actually spark a lot of criticism from the Western media. Right now, the criticism is this, that he has not been here. He hasn't really, been seen there. But had he been over there, I'm sure that all these leaders, from Canada and United States and Australia and Germany and France and United Kingdom, they would have been compelled to make critical statements.
And G20 is an economic forum, so it would have been hijacked totally by the geopolitics. So I think it's positive for the world, actually, that he didn't turn up. And on that, I'd like to ask you, what are the other interesting things that you found came out of the declaration for you?
I think there has been some sort of India-Middle East trade connection has also been discussed and over there. In the last couple of years, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar are looking towards the Indian market for investments. Now, having said this, it is seldom realized that how desperate these countries, the resource-rich countries, are, because if now you are in the United States and you see, when you go and want to order a petroleum oil gasoline car, you have to wait for a number of weeks, because all the automobile industry in this country, which is the biggest market for the cars, for the car manufacturers from all over the world, are increasingly switching to the electric vehicles. whether it's Tesla or BMW or Mercedes or Ford, or all of them are actually turning, and all of them have shifted their resources to the production of the electric vehicles. I mean, starting from the state of California, which has given a sort of a deadline that after this deadline, no petrol vehicles will actually be allowed to be safe. So, and there's so many other parallel developments that are happening with the petroleum industry and the future of all this. So Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar and others they do realize, I mean, they have consultants state of the art, whether it's McKinsey or Booz Allen, and they fully realize that the future of their economies is in trouble, and they want to develop investments that will feed them when the oil revenues will start to dwindle, which will start to happen maybe in the next several years. So India is also very eager to get their investment. So a new trade corridor, economic corridor is developing. Some people even suspect that this Middle Eastern India trade connection will ultimately be able to provide a safer avenue, a hidden avenue for Indian opening to the Pakistani economy.
Well, it's not clear how they intend to open this economic corridor, because they're saying it won't be going through Iran and it's not going through Pakistan, presumably. So it's not very clear how do they intend to go from India to Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, and from there on to Europe. So, and another thing that's very interesting is literally 2 years ago in 2021 G7 meeting, the United States had come up with an idea of what's called the B3W, which was Build Back a Better World. And hundreds of billions of dollars were promised as once again, an infrastructure project. And we reached nowhere with this. Whether these
many ideas don't take off. The ideas
don't take off. This particular one has no timeline attached. There's no projects that are really being discussed as to what's going to come under this. Whereas, and it's being built as a counterpart to the BRI. And BRI, we see things on the ground. I mean, CPEC, for all we lambast it, we are seeing things on the ground. There are physical entities from which CPEC actually, configures. Whereas this is still an idea up in the air. And whether Western economies have that GDP and the ability to spend that kind of money is still a question for us to ask, really, if they're going to go.
But Najma, hang on. The jury is still out on the future of the Belt Road Initiative. When the initiative was first launched or presented by Xi Jinping in 2014, and the CPEC, which is one of the flagship projects of the Belt Road Initiative, because Pakistan was the only country on the borders, the only really friendly country which was on the borders of China that wholly and solely welcomed it and had a strong military machine to safeguard the projects. And everyone in Pakistan was attuned and aligned to the idea of Chinese investments. And then Pakistanis very quickly started to project it. The Chinese have never presented it as a strategic thing. If you look at the Chinese statements and Chinese publications and Chinese writings, they are a controlled society anyway. They have not called it a game changer or something that's going to change the geostrategic balance of the world. But Pakistani, young doctoral candidates, retired army officers, politicians, all sorts of people, started to give it the name of the big game changer, started to show it as a sunset of the America and the West and the rise of the China, along with Pakistan, Central Asia, Afghanistan, Iran, and all that. I mean, they have been parading these ideas, they have done it to death, and very quickly after 2015, the America and its Western allies started seeing CPEC and Belt Road Initiative as a threat. Much has been written about it. So I don't know what is the final situation. I mean, my understanding is this, that nothing much is happening on CPEC for the past number of years, and the Pakistani establishment had changed its direction without ever declaring it. The Chinese, being Chinese, are not making an open comment on it. But at some point, General Bajwa and his people, principally General Bajwa, decided that he doesn't trust the Chinese while the government was still Imran Khan, and he took steps in a way that has diminished the forward development of the CPEC. And I think the situation is like this. I don't know if CPEC is really progressing at the moment.
Do you think G20 matters? Because it was set up after 2008 when the financial crisis happened, and it did a fantastic job of rallying the countries around spending money and ensuring that the bank collapses that were happening at the time did not take down the world economy. Subsequently, we haven't seen much follow through on all the promises it made. It's several times said they're going to have climate financing. They back down once they make that promise. There's other promises. One major promise they made, I think it was 2021 once again, was that they would no longer provide coal financing for power plants. But what they forgot to mention was that domestic financing can still take place. We know that coal is one of the most important contributors to climate change. And yet this summit, this organization, G20, have been able to do nothing. Where do you think G20 still matters?
It's a very big and difficult and complex question. Regarding the coal thing, I think there was some sort of statement in the final declaration I was reading. But the problem is this, that India's economy is still heavily dependent on coal. Chinese have also been dependent on coal, but through the Belt Road Initiative and other measures in the last few years, they're trying to shift their coal plants in order to make themselves more environmental friendly to other countries. I think the export of the coal power plants to Pakistan is part of the same thinking and strategy. But India is heavily dependent on coal. So I don't think any real progress is going to happen in terms of the coal. You know, in terms of the forward vision for G20, as you mentioned that Xi Jinping, we earlier discussed, didn't join the summit. Ultimately, the G20, there is a sort of a competition going on between the Chinese, Russian, and the Indian world, and the United States-led Western world. And India is in the middle. India is crucial once again, because Russia has developed very adverse relationship with United States and its countries because of the Ukraine war, which is a direct outcome of what the Russians actually felt was a pressure being generated around their borders by the expansion of NATO and by changing the governments, the Moscow-friendly governments, because the crisis started to develop when a Moscow-friendly government in which Moscow had invested countless billions of dollars was actually removed in what Moscow thought was a sort of a revolution or a coup against Moscow. So Moscow, Russia, which has been an integral component of the Western civilization from almost, very importantly from the 18th century, but even before otherwise, but from 18th century, Russians have been part of the European concert of power and all the diplomacy, and the Europeans have fought their own wars of the balance of power on the European theater. The First World War, the Second World War, Russian help was very important. So now, for the first time in the last couple of years, the West and Russia are loggerheads with each other. And Chinese are standing by the Russians. That leaves now the three major powers of the world, Russia, China, and India. Only India is equidistant between the Chinese-Russian bloc and between the Western bloc. And you see how, and in realizing this importance, India's Ministry of External Affairs, which is one of the most skilled foreign ministry anywhere in the world, has been able to very quickly leverage itself and started talking after the Galwan conflict and war of the war of 2020. People in Pakistan were thinking that China and India have become sworn enemies. So which actually brings us to the paucity of analysis and superficiality of analysis on the Pakistani side. Look how quickly Indians and Chinese were able to engage themselves, and how many important meetings have taken place between Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping, and also between their foreign ministries. So India is very important in all this equation. This is where India's importance is, because India is playing the balancing role.
So one interesting thing that I know you do want to discuss, and we'll come back to it in another program, is this concept of India versus Bharat. So we thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you.